Mr. Secretary General, you are a seasoned diplomat and a leader, currently trying to maintain consensus in an alliance that does have some diverging interests, strategies. Is your current challenge trying to manage what some allies see as a rather unpredictable US administration?
To be honest, I don't think it's unpredictable. I think President Trump has been entirely clear about NATO, and that he's totally committed. But he is also extremely irritated with the fact that Europeans and Canada, till today, were not committing to spend the same as the US is spending. And by the way, we have to get to those numbers because we know the Russian threat is there, we know terrorism is there, we know we have, of course, the build-up of the Chinese military. So we have to do that for the US, but also for our own safety. And so I think he was clear, committed, and an expectation. So I would not call that unpredictable. It's very predictable.
But in the post-summit press conference, he was once again asked about his definition of Article 5, and he wasn't really very clear on his answer. I think that's probably adding to the concerns on the European side.
Well, I would not be worried about that because the US is totally committed to Article 5, totally committed to NATO. And it is only right that we do not discuss the exact moment when Article 5 would be triggered, because we do not want Putin to be any wiser than he is already.
Given that Russia has arguably been the biggest concern for you and for many other NATO members, and when President Trump is asked about how he views Putin and how he views Russia in general, the language he's using is very different from the language coming from you. Is that a matter of concern for you?
No, it is not, because I think we all agree that we should not be naive. We all agree we should not be naive about Russia. We know what happened in February 22. Of course, it started already in March 2014 with the invasion of Crimea. We know that the Russians are massively reconstituting themselves, including in ammunition, where we are really behind the Russians at the moment. So we have to produce more, and Turkey is helping because you have an amazing defense industrial base in Turkey. So no, I think other than nuances and this word or that word, but more generally speaking about Russia, we have more or less the same analysis.
What's your assessment when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war? Do you think hard power is going to be the way forward, at least possibly for a couple of years? Or do you think you've reached a point where diplomacy is going to take its course?
Well, you know, I was impressed when President Trump came on board that he broke the deadlock with Putin, that he started to have a conversation with him. And he's the only one who successfully could do that, because the US is such a big country and the mightiest military in the world. So him doing that, I always found extremely important. And yes, of course, this is not solved in a week or a month, so this will take some time. But in the end, what we need to get this to is a situation where there is a long-term ceasefire, or even better, a peace deal, which is lasting, which is durable, which will not be tested by Putin.
President Zelensky is asking for more financial assistance, more military assistance, and he feels that if he is to go on the negotiating table at this point in time, he's going to be starting from a very weak position. Do you share that assessment?
Well, the first is true that, of course, he needs help, and that's what we are providing. So the good news is that this year already we provided, as NATO countries, over 35 billion, which is more than last year at this point of the year, to Ukraine. So I think that's important. So the support is continuing, including the military support. On your second question, well, I think what he did was very good. When Putin said, "Okay, I'm going to Istanbul," and Hasan, the foreign minister, was hosting that meeting, and he was willing. And the Russians were saying we were serious about negotiating. Then they sent this strange historian and a sort of junior team. It was then the Ukrainians sending the foreign minister, the defense minister, the national security advisor, a very senior team to Istanbul. So I think this is clear evidence that President Zelensky wants to engage with Russia.
But given that Russia is continuing its attacks on Ukraine, it seems that perhaps Russia is trying to further consolidate its position, gather a more sort of position of strength. How long do you think Russia is in a position to sustain this war effort?
Yeah, you know, the Russians are making incremental gains. It is almost zero. It's very little what they have gained this year, and they lost so many people. Of course, the Ukrainians also lost soldiers or seriously wounded, but on the Russian side, the numbers are really staggering when you see them. And then the Russians have decided to bomb innocent civilians in cities and communities all over Ukraine, which is, to me, not a sign of strength. It's a sign of weakness. And when Zelensky, a couple of weeks ago, on that famous Sunday, hit this fighter jet capacity on the Russian side, and these fighter jets were used to bomb innocent civilians on the Ukrainian side, he did that very focused with a minimum of loss of life, and I think that's the way to do it.
You said earlier that we, presumably NATO, cannot allow Russia to outproduce us. Given your statement, do you believe that there's a wide gap in the production capacity of Europe, especially if you were to take the US out of it? Because just earlier, after the summit, President Trump once again said that Europe should look after its own security. So do you have any sort of contingency planning if Europe has to?
No, when it comes to production, we have to do it together, transatlantic. And Europeans are now buying 4 times more from the US than the US is buying in Europe. And it's difficult to calculate it like that because these companies are more and more interconnected. You have some very big companies in Turkey, in a defense industrial base, who have a close cooperation with US companies in Texas. And we know that Thales, the big French company, defense industrial company, is working closely with partners in the US. And you have these interceptor production companies in the US building now interceptor factories in Germany, one of them in the south of Germany in Bavaria. So it is getting more and more interconnected. The problem is not the defense industrial base as such. The problem is that base in Turkey, in Germany, in Italy, in the UK, in Norway, in Canada, in the US, needs to put in the extra production lines and the extra shifts.
Finally, Mr. Secretary General, how do you see the role of Turkey in terms of defense contribution, one? And second point, there is this concern, quite common concern within the Turkish government, and also when you speak to the ordinary Turks, that Europe wants Turkish cooperation when it comes to defense collaboration, but when it comes to political integration, for example, the EU, Turkey is sidelined. What's your personal take on this?
Well, first of all, the role of Turkey in NATO is crucial. Your president is a senior, seasoned leader. He is very important. He has a lot of influence. So we need him at the table, and we need Turkey at the table. This is because of your fantastic military, but also because of your defense industrial base. Of course, when it comes to EU, Turkey, I should do this because that's not my job. I'm working on NATO. And within NATO, Turkey is a highly respected ally.
Secretary General, thank you for talking to TRT World.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really.